Isn't that illegal? Isn't that unconstitutional? That's probably your response to actions that Donald Trump wants to take during his administration. Well, that would be true under the United States Constitution. Upon the inauguration of Donald Trump, the branches and the people have approved replacing constitutional supremacy per Article 6 with Trump supremacy. To understand that, you have to watch the court video that I will link. With that said, there are two ways of establishing a coup in a country. The first one is a military coup. That's the one we all know. Military comes in and says, you gotta leave, they leave. Obviously, there's violence, but basically. The second one is a legislative coup. This one looks much more official. By official, I mean that people don't recognize that it is a coup, because this requires subverting the branches to benefit a specific faction. For instance, how Donald Trump has subverted the branches to benefit MAGA. This is what he tried to do on January 6th, but failed to do so. He succeeded this time. This is a silent replacement of the constitutional supremacy with a dictator supremacy. You know what's fascinating? That Benito Mussolini, the Italian fascist of the 20th century, literally got into power without even breaking the Constitution. He did not violate the Constitution, yet he's still a fascist. Donald Trump violated his constitutional oath to uphold and defend the United States Constitution. This is why there is a legitimacy problem, because the courts did not satisfy any remedy as to whether or not his win would even be legitimate. Even his candidacy was legitimate. They failed to uphold their basic duty to answer constitutional questions that affect the public sphere. Now, as I've positioned, this is going to lead to the judicial reform required that we could not achieve beforehand, because this was the political shock that will prove that they have failed beyond comparable doubt to actually secure the national security and constitutional security, which is the most important thing of the United States of America. Which means that this presidency would not be legitimate, giving room for blue states to reject authority of the federal government. This can be done because through our state constitutions, we are obligated to the United States Constitution, not to the federal government. This is why state rights exist. A quick example, you may have been asking, why didn't the federal government send all of its resources into the states that were affected by Hurricane Helene? State rights are forbidden from intervening in state rights. So unless a state actually says, hey, come here, I need you, the federal government is banned from doing that. In other words, if you are drowning, the federal government has to ask the states if it can help you. There is discussion there. However, state rights is actually going to protect blue states from the worst of Trump's policies, like mass deportations, because blue states don't have to comply. Denaturalization, blue states don't have to comply. So that quota will come from red states. The people being denaturalized won't be from blue states. It's going to be from red states. Why? Because that would require him to use force on blue states, and that will create a CW, right? Why would he care? As I tell you, it's all about illusion. He's not going to remove the Constitution on day one, even though technically he will, because he would be doing things that are technically unconstitutional. However, it's paused, right? It's paused because it's suspended. Why? Because doing so would be such a shock to the people that the people would react. So you have to boil us a little bit, increase the temperature so that we don't fight back. Also, there has to be an illusion to the international community that he is complying lawfully within his policy. This means probably denaturalizing dual citizens before denaturalizing anyone else. Why? Under international law, you cannot leave a person stateless without a citizenship. So this would be easier when they're dual citizens because you don't leave them without a citizenship. Britain has used this in order to remove citizenship from Britain-born women with dual citizenship in Syria who went to Syria to be in ISIS. But this is the thing, enemy of the state, right? But what is an enemy of the state? That will be decided by Donald Trump. You will say, well, why would they even care about complying with international law? It's not complying, it's the illusion of complying. Because not complying to an extent that it is visibly undeniable that you are not complying would result in bad actors, aka our enemies, being capable of utilizing the responsibility to protect. That is an international law norm that allows countries to intervene in other countries for humanitarian purposes. These purposes don't have to be valid. We went into the Middle East because they were oppressing women, right? Totally not, because we wanted their resources. So then Russia, China are capable of intervening on humanitarian grounds. Prior to his inauguration, what would defend us from this is the supremacy clause, because the supremacy clause is literally the bulletproof vest. It keeps us from facing accountability in international justice. Because the deal is that the United States has the capable judicial processes in order to prosecute all international law crimes within our own courts. However, when the supremacy and legitimacy of the Constitution falls, that means that we don't have that provision anymore. that leaves us vulnerable to international repercussions. Now, this won't happen automatically. It will be by scale depending on how our enemies want to utilize it. It is questionable whether Russia would, because if Russia did help in securing Trump the election, I would be extremely surprised if what Trump owes to Russia isn't leaving the G7 and joining BRICS. That would be wild. Point is that even if there's an illusion that there is lawfulness and the constitutionality, it's not going to exist. If you're a civil rights lawyer, what are you gonna do? Make an action against the federal government from Georgia about how a certain policy is breaking the United States Constitution? Do you not think that they don't know? If under the United States Constitution, prior to his inauguration, the rule of law is derived from the United States Constitution, but if we replace that, what does that mean? That we replaced it with a new rule of law. That rule of law will shape its own law. For example, the Holocaust, all of that terrible stuff that Hitler did, it was lawful. Why? Because he was the rule of law. So I cannot emphasize the reality that post-Trump inauguration, you have a concept of constitutional rights and protections. It's not real unless you're in a blue state, because states are automatically bound by the United States Constitution. But if you're in a red state, it can kind of be defaulted that it will probably be loyal to the Trump policy and agenda. So when you see something that Trump wants to do and you say he can't do that because it's unconstitutional, it doesn't apply when Trump is president, because we've replaced the collective social contract of the United States Constitution when Americans voted for him. When courts refused to decide on the legitimacy of his candidacy, therefore allowing for him to even be an option. When Congress failed to commit to any legislative action because MAGA controlled the Congress. Success. To ban anyone who committed or comforted an insurrection. And the executive failed on January 6th by not allowing for the certification to happen on the lawful date of January 6th. Instead, it happened on January 7th, a day too late. This tells us that there are such severe breaches of violations that in not rectifying this, it puts us under a dictatorship where the Constitution doesn't matter. Why? Because of a sort of legislative coup. You may say, well, he's very old, so he's not going to be here for long. Yeah, in Mexico had the perfect dictatorship. You know why? Because it wasn't just the same head of state. It was the same party for over 100 years, and it sent the country, it was in turmoil. It didn't work. Why? Because they're complacent, and obviously the branches adapt to an agenda that doesn't have to be for the people, but for the party. Ultimately, it's about party brand success. Mexico's dictatorship was a neoliberal one. It put the people at the sacrifice of capitalism. Note, the United States Constitution has capitalism. However, capitalism is a means to an end. That is a socialist end. That is the public good. All you have to do is read the preamble to understand this. Federalist 1 will also help us. This idea will add the inducements of philanthropy to those of patriotism. Happy will it be if our choice should be directed by a judicious estimate of our true interest, unperplexed and unbiased by considerations not connected with the public good. What is the public good? The public good is not public opinion. The public good is the people per our social contract. That is the United States Constitution. However, post-inauguration, that's just radio noise.